Matthew here, Fiberglass Supply. Hey, we are getting into the foil thing, and it is completely awesome. So later this week or next week, I am going to go to the Oregon coast for a few days. We've been foiling behind the boat. I have a stand-up paddle board here that I want to add a foil track to. So we're going to add a foil track to this board. We're just going to put it right here in front of the fin box, and we're going to go from there with this. What we're going to do is we're going to mark out where the box is going to go. And simply here I've just lined it up on the center line and I'm marking it with a marker. Then we want to set the router to the right depth. We want to be at the depth of the fin box or maybe up to an 1/8 inch deeper. After we have that done, we're then going to route out the hole in the board. So what I'm simply doing here, I'm doing it freehand. Or you can use a jig. In this case, I'm just routing the perimeter and coming right up to that line that I have already marked. I'm not cutting the stringer out at this point, and the reason for that is that I'm using that stringer to rest the router on as I cut. And you can see here how the stringer's still there, and that gives me a rest for the router on both sides so that the router doesn't fall in the hole or do anything weird. So now that I've routed out that perimeter on each side of the stringer, I'm going to do a full depth cut now, and I'm routing out. Again, I typically route out perimeter, and then I route out the stuff in the middle. And here we've sped it up so you don't have to watch me go super slow. And now we're going to clean it up a little bit. And what I'm doing here is I'm cutting the ends of the stringer. So I'm just using the plunge router to drill through that stringer to the bottom, and then I'll break it out by hand. Just wiggle it, and it usually will snap along the grain of the wood. If you have to, you can come in and route it, or you can use another tool like a fine multi-master type tool or something to clean that out if you need to. Now I'm going to double check the size of the box. In this case you don't see it here, but I actually went and sanded the box down a little bit to get it to fit. You want it to fit in there pretty easily with as small a gap as you can get away with. After you've got a good fit, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to tape around the box about 6 inches out. And the reason for that is we're going to make up a putty using glass bubbles and cabosil and epoxy, and there's going to be some squeeze out, and we don't want that sticking to the board, so we're going to mix that putty up. First thing you do is you mix your resin. We're using slow hardener for this step because we don't want the resin to get too hot. So mix the resin thoroughly, then add in 3M bubbles. I like to start with about a 1:1 by volume. So if I had, say, 8 ounces of resin, I'd add 8 ounces of bubbles. And you can add a little bit more than that. And then we're going to add some cabosil and mix it until it's thick and doesn't run. So you can see how it's hanging on the stick there. The next step is going to be to mix, or not mix, but spread that putty into the hole and onto the box. And you want to goop them up pretty good, and you're going to squeeze out all the excess. If I remember right, I mixed up about 150 milliliters of resin. May have been a little bit more than I needed, but it's okay to have a little extra. Better to have a little extra than to come up short. So you can see here we're just buttering up the box. We're going to butter up the bottom and all the sides, and then we're going to press that in place. And so like I said, you will have some excess, and that's going to squeeze out onto the green tape. In this case, I accidentally slipped with the router and I put a notch in the top of that box on the board, and you can see that's why I have the tape back a little bit, because we're going to fill that notch at the same time. And that is something to point out. Something like that happens. It's kind of a bummer, but it's not the end of the world. So we pressed it down. We've got some squeeze out. We've cleaned up most of the squeeze out, but you want to leave a little. And in this case, we're concerned about the box kind of floating up, so I put some lead weights on it. Now I'm going to come in with a grinder, and I've got an 80 grit disc on here, and just carefully clean up that squeeze out. What I'm doing here is screwing things up. So and you'll see here in a minute. So once you've got that cleaned up, you're just going to pull the tape and clean that up with a razor blade. There we go, getting that scraped off. And now what I'm doing, I'm actually not grinding on the box. What I'm doing is I'm sanding a little perimeter around the board, so that it'll bond. And when we cap this with glass, it'll bond to it. Taping that off right now. We're going to do about a 6-inch tape perimeter. We're leaving a perimeter around the box that the glass will bond to. And now we're going to cut out 3 layers of fiberglass fabric to put over that. And this is a 6-ounce fabric. It's E-glass. You could use S-glass. Either one will work. S-glass would be a little bit stronger. It's going to be a little bit stiffer. And we're going to cut out 3 layers. The reason we're doing 3 here, 1 is strength, but 2, with 3, that gives us a layer that we can grind a little bit into and not really lose anything. So we want to cap over that. One of the things you didn't see when I sanded that is I accidentally sanded too low in between the 2 boxes, so that I put a little wow in there. So we are going to mix up a little bit of putty after we mix our resin here. And with that putty, we're going to fill that low. Before you get too carried away on the resin, you need to make sure you remember to tape over the box openings. I'm using 3M 233 masking tape. That's the green tape here. So far we've used the 2-inch width, and this is a 3/4 inch width. So we're just going to put some tape over the box openings. Here I am puttying that low spot I made. So again, not the end of the world. We can putty this in, and while the putty's still wet, put the glass down. Next time I'll just be a little more careful and not put a low spot there. So we're going to put the glass in place and then pour some epoxy on it and wet it out. What we're after is full saturation, so we'll use a squeegee to spread that around and saturate that glass fabric all the way out. And in this case, because the patches are small, we're going to wet out 1 layer at a time. Once this first layer is wet, we'll drop the second one on, repeat, drop the third one on, repeat. You want to get it saturated and get all the bubbles out, but you still want some of the glass weave texture to show. So as you see that turn in the light here, you'll kind of see how we still have that texture. So the space between the weave is filled, but there is still a texture. It's not big glassy areas. You do want to catch this part when the resin gets to about cheddar cheese stage in the cure. So it's not cured hard. It's still kind of soft. Get in there with your razor knife, with a razor blade or a razor knife, and trim off the masking tape. That's much easier to do at this point. Otherwise, you'll need to come back with like a Dremel later to open that box up. And so we're just going to use a utility blade there, and we're going to get that masking tape open. We still need to put another coat of resin over that, so we'll retape after we've opened those up, so we don't get resin in there. So that's what we're doing here, putting another layer of tape on there, and then we're going to paint a coat of resin on, which would be considered your hot coat or your fill coat. So here we are again, just another layer of epoxy. This one's not thickened or anything, and we're going to brush that on. I usually use a crosshatch pattern, so go hard one way and then go hard over it the other way, and then lightly brush it in one direction and let it flow out. After the epoxy cures, then you're going to want to sand it smooth, and so we're going to sand over this. Right here I'm paying attention to the edges, blending that edge down, kind of feathering it down to the board. I leave the masking tape on for a couple of reasons. One, we've got some fiberglass that's over it, so it'd be hard to take off. And 2, it gives me something to sand a little bit into and not hit the board. So I'm going to feather those edges and then sand over the whole thing until we have an even patina. In this case, I'm going to paint it. So you want to sand it to 220 grit. I started with 80, 120, 220. And here I am just blending that final little bit in after I've removed the tape. Just kind of checking a couple spots around the edge. I'm going to blend that and then mask for the paint job. So the yellow foam that is used in that high density cassette will brown out in the sunlight. So we want to color it, and it looks ugly the way it is. So we're gonna do a little yellow spray paint and then a red fade around it. That'll kind of match well with the orange boxes that are already in this board. If I want to take a little more time, I maybe could have done a flame thing, or rounded the corners, or done a number of things. So here we are, just painting it. Now we're gonna pull the tape, and off that comes for the reveal. Again, I'm not super thrilled about the hard edges, but I kind of wanted to get it done and get it out. And here's what it looks like after we've sprayed a little clear over it and blended it in. So if you have any questions on this, drop us a line, email me, or call us at Fiberglass Supply, and I would love to answer those questions for you. Thanks.